Joanna Macy, the great environmental activist and systems ecologist, said that when faced with planetary crisis, there are three stories we can tell ourselves. Business as usual, in which we tell ourselves that some degree of damage is necessary for human progress. The great unraveling, in which we tell ourselves that mass ecosystem destruction is inevitable. And the great turning, in which we tell ourselves that evolving the way we live is the only way forward, and that we're at the beginning of one of the great projects in human history. On this podcast, we talk to people who are writing that third story, with their own work and their own lives. Mission-driven leaders who are dedicated to social and environmental impact at this critical moment for our species. Welcome to The Turning Point. There's a lot of rhetoric flying around right now about rising energy prices, data center demand, and what the future holds for our power grid. So I thought now would be a good time to have Pete Reese of Energy ReLeaf on the show. Pete has worked both on the residential side and on the utility side. So he's not just speculating when he talks about the looming demand problems and the very real constraints we're facing collectively to meet those demands. But Pete isn't just crying wolf. He's a problem solver. And that's what caught my interest about Energy ReLeaf. With his years of experience in the energy industry, it's his belief that growing point-of-use generation is a key piece of the supply puzzle if we're to maintain a steady and reliable grid over the next decade. That's why he and his partners are in the process of patenting multiple innovations in solar roofing shingles. Innovations designed to make rooftop solar simpler to install and maintain, more affordable, more durable, and better looking on your roof. As Pete explains, the U.S. needs to bring 400 gigawatts of new power generation online by 2030, and we're currently on pace for only half that. So home solar is a necessary means of meeting that demand. If I don't have your full attention yet, stay here for the full interview with Pete. Hope you enjoy. All right, Pete Reese, welcome to The Turning Point.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, glad to have you on, Pete. So we know you're an advocate for solar, but when I talk to you, you have a way of articulating our power generation and power grid issues that's a little different. So could you start by talking to us about where solar fits into the power needs of our grid in our country?
Yeah, my kids play football, and it feels like we are inside the 2-minute warning, and our coach is benching the fastest players. Solar and wind are the quickest to put up, especially solar, especially residential solar. You don't need transmission. You don't need a lot of upgrades with even your distribution system on your block. You might have a can or a transformer sitting on your block that's been there since the 90s, but that's not solar's fault. So solar is the most rapidly deployable energy source. Traditional utility sources are constrained by years-long wait times for transformers. Gas turbines, which are considered quick to build, have 4-5 year lead times on that. And the challenge of this whole conversation is that with AI and data centers, they're really the equivalent of a town or a small city in and of themselves. It's a massive issue we're talking about of our energy needs. We need to really double our energy generation, new energy generation. We install about 40 gigawatts a year. And last year, 90% of that was wind and solar. Now, like I said, we're benching those resources, and nothing else is going to fill in the blank. And that's really where I see residential solar, particularly solar shingles. But hopefully that explains the broader context of the issue that we as a society are dealing with. And I'm not even talking about emissions at this point, right? Yeah, climate is existential, but we have so many other practical reasons to keep solar on the playing field.
Right. We have a lot of demand coming online and expected to come online in the next decade.
Yep. Absolutely.
And how we're going to meet that demand in the short term seems to be the problem. Like you said, it's a time issue. Developing transmission is a lot of infrastructure and a lot of time.
Yeah. Transmission is years to develop. Fortunately, we have, utilities, largely because of the drive to get solar and wind, they've been working on these network upgrades for years already. So right now we are building transmission, but it's not enough. It's not fast enough, and ultimately we're short on generation. Unless we want to import 400 gigawatts of generation every day, which Canada's happy to sell us stuff if we don't tariff them too high.
And you mentioned turbines. That seems to be one of the default options for building new generation right now. But even that, there's a huge backlog for new turbines. Am I right?
Correct. Yeah, as the way I keep the lights on, I consult for a large investor-owned utility located here in Minnesota. If you're in Minnesota, you know who that is. They have an integrated resource plan where they are doubling down on solar to gas at about 4-1. So they're still all in on solar and wind, regardless of what the political winds or social media disinformation might want to tell us. So solar's not going away, but most of the good sites are taken until we get that transmission built, which it's going to be another 5 years, 10 years before the stuff that's being built right now comes on service, because they're constrained by transformers and grid support tech too, like everyone.
Right. And when you're saying, just to clarify what you're saying there, you're talking about utility scale solar and wind generation.
Correct.
So you're saying utilities recognize that's the fastest way to build new generation,
Yep.
but they're limited by the fact that they have to be proximal to good transmission in order to build those sites.
Absolutely. And the infrastructure that's in rural areas where you put these wind and solar plants is, it was built for small farms 100 years ago, right? By cooperatives, which we'll get into later as well, too. So they didn't build 345, 500 kV, massive 150 foot tall with, those wires look small, but they're actually about this big. If you would hold one in your hand, like some of those crazy linemen do from helicopters, but they're not spider webs. They are the size of my 9-year-old's arm. Those lines up there, but they were not built 100 years ago.
So you're talking about the high capacity lines.
Absolutely. That's the stuff that gets your, we're building a line. We jokingly call it the transmission line to nowhere, but it's designed to move gigawatts or, 4,000 of these, or 4 black holes worth of wind and solar electricity from western Minnesota and the Dakotas to the Twin Cities, Chicago, whatnot, because the solar and wind are objectively the cheapest generation to build. In fact, there's so much wind and solar generation in western Minnesota and North and South Dakota that when conditions are right, there's so much electricity wants to come this way that the pricing is negative, right? The producers actually have to pay money if they wanted to send electricity, so they just shut it down, right? So that's the line that we're building, which, like I said, it's not going to come online for another 4 or 5 years. So that's why I've always been passionate about point of use, behind the meter, home, business, renewables and generation. And the more I'm in this business, the more I know about it, the more passionate I become.
Okay, so first of all, that's an incredible story about the transmission issue. I mean, that's one of the best illustrations I've heard of the transmission problem itself.
Yeah, well, and it's all public knowledge too. There are real-time websites which show you the real-time pricing at substations across this country for wholesale power, and it's negative. It's coming from rural areas where
Yes, and some people are trying to tell us that utility rates are going to rise because of renewables, which is pretty silly, huh?
Yeah, correlation is not causation.
Yeah.
What I tell people is, do you think it's possible that the states with high and rising rates saw this coming and are trying to do something about it? And, the rising rates, just because they're happening while we're building renewables, we're trying to get ahead of those rising rates rather than be behind the curve. So, yeah.
Okay, but so to pivot as you just were, this highlights the need for residential solar and for, like you said, on-site production and use. So very quickly, talk to us about residential solar, because when I think about residential solar, I think about the big panels sitting on top of the roof. That's all. That's mostly what I've known about it for my lifetime. So tell us what the issues are with the adoption of residential solar. Are there obstacles to it? If this is the solution, why isn't it happening?
Yeah, so there's as a someone who's been a lifetime entrepreneur, there's a adoption curve for new technology, and it actually, believe it or not, takes about 50 years from the introduction of a technology until mass adoption. And we're, I don't know, 15, 20 years in. There's kind of this, if you think of a normal curve, right? You have a small tail, and those are the innovators, and that's, 2% of the population. And then you have the early adopters, which is about 13, 14% of the population. Residential solar period is about 5% of the homes, 5% of the, 140 million homes or so in the country have solar. So that right there, it's largely early adopters who are willing to put up with some hiccups and challenges. As a comparison, the first automobile commercially available, the 1880s, right? The Ford Model T hit its peak in, the 1920s, right?
Mm-hmm.
If we had just said, oh, let's stop here, the Ford Model T is the best we can do, we'd all be driving Ford Model Ts here 100 years later. But they didn't, right? They kept developing the Model A and then the Mustang and then, all the muscle cars of the 70s. And now, now we're here, hopefully in the EV era, which is still, once again, we're kind of in that early adoption side, the early adoption climb up that curve. So we're, when people say, why is it taking so long for solar to get adopted? Well, we still haven't reached a tipping point, right? So, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, so that's kind of the overall picture of the adoption of solar and the barriers now. I would say there probably half the people who would otherwise get solar, and I don't have statistics on this, but I would, in my own personal experience as a residential solar installer, I would say a good 50% of the people who would otherwise get solar don't like the look of it, right? They have no other problem with it except I bought my house because I like the way it looks, and it's going to change the way my house looks. So, that's fair, right? It's someone's property. People are willing to put up with all sorts of other eyesores, but in their own personal property, I get it. I do get it.
So Pete, if we can stay zeroed in on this like individual homeowner,
yes.
aside from aesthetics, what are some of the other challenges that someone like, that that a homeowner might encounter on their journey of exploring whether they want to become an early adopter?
Yeah. One of the biggest challenges is, frankly, utilities, and I don't want to call them the bad guy. We need them, but they own the grid, the distribution system. And if you're going to put solar on your house, unless you have a lot of batteries, you're going to need to have an interconnection agreement with the utility to, export that power. For example, July 4th, you're on vacation, you're not home, you're not using air conditioning. Unless your system shuts off, you are going to export to the utility. So Minnesota has 169 utilities. Wisconsin, I think, has 98 or something like that, combination of investor-owned, cooperative in rural areas, and then municipal utilities. And each one of them has a different process. The state of Minnesota has tried to standardize that, but they still each have their own process and their different appetite for putting solar electrons into their property, into a distribution system that was never designed to be two-way. So they can take a long time. Under the state of Minnesota, they have up to really 12 weeks to grant an interconnection agreement, and there's a lot of back and forth, technical drawings, conversations. I would say that's probably one of the number one barriers. It's a year-long process. You really need to dedicate your time and energy to under the traditional no battery, no storage model. If you, like I mentioned before, if you have enough batteries, you don't actually need the utility, and then you're semi-off grid. But until our technology, that has been prohibitively expensive for most people. I talked about the existential issue with the grids. We have really been blessed with a wonderful grid for many, many years, and it's still very, very good in most places. You only need to go to, not resorts in developing countries, but go spend some time with real people. And when the resorts and the businesses and the wealthy want electricity and they don't have enough, they just shut it down to the poor and the middle class areas. That's frankly most of the world. If a billion people still don't have electricity, and then, the rest of the world, except the wealthy countries, have sporadic or inconsistent electricity, and that's largely a function of how much money you have. I don't want to see that in the U.S., but do you think they're going to shut down an Amazon data center if there's not enough power on the grid? No. They're going to shut down our podcast in the middle of it.
So what you're suggesting that as our power generation issues become more acute, something is going to give. Right?
Yes,
either it's going to get
absolutely.
Either what we have come to take for granted is cheap and reliable electricity may not be a thing in the future.
Yeah. We don't want every house with a generator humming, because that's the most expensive and dirtiest electricity out there. So unless we find a way to make residential solar aesthetically appealing, quick to install, and affordable in a painless way, it'll take another 50 years for us to get to the mass adoption state. I don't think it's going to take that long, but we can accelerate it with a good mix of policy, like, tax credits and the supportive federal, state, and local government, but we might have to wait for that.
Right. So coming back to, we were talking about the obstacles to adoption for individual homeowners. So you talked about aesthetics. You talked about the agreements with the utilities.
And
what are the
cost,
other?
Yep.
And cost. Yeah.
Cost is a big one. I am a fan of tax credits and incentives for, game-changing technology that is still not mature. So, having that policy certainty with the IRA through 2032 with the 3% investment tax credit for residential solar.
And just to clarify that, right? The tax credits on home solar were fluctuating quite a bit from
Yes.
the 90s, early 2000s, and the IRA established what seemed like a firmer foundation to
Yes.
keep those tax credits in place at a certain level for a longer period of time.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for
Yes.
thank you for clarifying that, because
clarifying for listeners, and then the recent budget bill is phasing those out again.
Yeah, I mean, coal, oil, and gas have had a generally stable policy environment, if not favorable policy environment, for 100 years, right? So,
Right.
One of the things, frankly, that's hampered that adoption of solar has been what we refer to as the solar coaster in the industry. Every couple years with the new administration, there's a policy shift, and now it seems like we're trying to skateboard during an earthquake. That's the context for the price. And the 30% investment tax credit, I mean, it was a tax credit, right? Essentially, it's 30% more of your own money that you get to keep if you got solar on your house, right? So speaking from like the libertarian standpoint, government is theft. Let me keep more of my money. Well, they did let you keep more of your money if you did solar, which was considered to be a public good, right? For a number of reasons. Climate being one of the big pushes, but there's others, as I already mentioned.
Right. Reducing demand on the grid and.
Yep. I mean, and those are the more immediate issues, as we discussed. Unfortunately, as is the case in many subsidy-driven environments, you will have those who have the power, the control, and the leverage that will, do subsidy-seeking behavior, I call it. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with tax credits either. I'm just saying I believe those tax credits in some ways have kept solar artificially high. I think, and I could be way wrong, but I obviously the loss of that tax credit is not going to help the industry at large, but I actually don't think it's going to affect the pricing that much. I think the those who have wrung the 30% out of the tax credit will go on to, I don't know, oil and gas or geothermal, or something else, right? But solar's not going away. It is even without, they've done plenty of cost analysis, even without those tax credits and incentives, solar is still, whether it's utility scale, commercial, industrial, or residential, still on balance the least expensive quickest to market generation you can get. Another thing that speaks to cost too is traditional solar has dozens of pieces that need to be managed largely by electricians, and electricians aren't cheap. And you want the licensed electrician wiring up your electrical stuff. And the definition of where electrical work starts and ends with solar is a little squishy by state. There can be a chilling effect in certain states where a regulatory body says, nope, everything to do with solar is electrical work. And then you have electricians doing roofing work. And that also adds to the expense of solar. So, we are also, approaching the cost curve from the ease of installation and management of materials standpoint.
Okay, great. I think this is a good point for us to talk a little bit more about Energy ReLeaf.
And I could go on with problems, but let's talk solutions.
Well, I think we've got a decent grip on the problems. And to be honest, like I said, as a pretty casual fan of solar, I'm vaguely aware of some of these issues.
Yeah.
And I expect that if I'm getting solar put on my home, I'm going to be dealing with some of these things.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why for me, when I first learned about your product, I thought, oh, this is interesting, right? In my mind, solar is kind of a monolith.
Yeah.
It's fundamentally good, has some obstacles to installation, cost, etc. But I didn't realize there was innovation happening within the domain of solar. And that's where I was like, oh, I want to talk to this guy. So tell us about Energy ReLeaf products.
Yeah, so we make getting a beautiful solar roof simple and affordable for the average homeowner. We looked at all these issues, and so we designed our product based on our years of experience installing traditional solar, working on roofs, installing, actual asphalt shingles, and actually installing now competitors' products. And we identified those issues, right? Those problems. Their traditional solar doesn't look good to a lot of people. It's slow to interconnect. It's difficult to install. And we talked to really hundreds of people over the years, and over the last year and a half, we made sure we talked to at least 100 people who would be potential customers. And designs, our thoughts, our experience really was validated in the marketplace as we talk to people. So we have designed a full system from, where the sun hits the roof to the point of interconnection with the loads or utility. That's really only 4 key components. There's a back plate, and I can show my poor UPS abused solar shingle there, but there's a back plate that the solar mounts in. But instead of having to run conduit and wire, we have all that integrated within the back plate. And and this is where you could run the video, right? Showing that it's really a CAD video, but that raceway for the wiring and all the connections and whatnot is integrated within the back plate. It's a true shingle. It stacks, you have a course of shingles, and then you have another course of shingles and another course of shingles. So it does that. So you don't need shingles underneath it. It's to code, right? You need to make sure that your OSB, your wood sheeting, is even and leak proof, or not leak proof, but it's even and stable, just like you would with any re-roofing job. You put the underlayment down, ice and water barrier in the valleys and at the bottom of the roof where the ice dams can tend to happen, just like any other roof, and then underlayment like any other roof. And then the difference is, instead of putting recyclable asphalt, which is going to end up in the dump in 15 to 20 years, you put our 100% recyclable polypropylene or high density HDPE or PP, number 2 and number 5, like they're basically interchangeable with their recipe, and they will do the job of keeping the water out, but they're also going to pay for itself and last 40 to 50 years on your roof. So, and because we've made it so simple to install by one crew, rather, you don't need an electrical crew, a solar crew, and a roofing crew. You can do it with one crew. It's a good idea to have an electrician in that crew because, roofers don't necessarily, there's zero voltage. It's totally safe. But when people see wires, they tend to be like, am I going to get shocked? So it's good to have some knowledge on that crew. But, combination of low price point for the material, easy to install, and then, our other piece of the system, which is this is the electronics enclosure. And based on the market, you could either have batteries in here if you have a utility that is averse to interconnecting your system and takes a long time. You can have an enclosure that has batteries and is considered a non-exporting system. You don't even need the utility for that system. Obviously those are going to be a little more expensive than a regular grid-tied system because batteries are still generally expensive, but we're exploring some technologies that have a lot of promise. They're just expensive because they're not at scale. And that's the thing about technology that, your listeners probably are aware of, but just because something's cheap doesn't mean it was cheap when it was first coming out 10, 20, 50 years ago. Just because coal and gas might be cheaper than putting new solar in place, it just means that they're fully depreciated. That's what that means, right? So new infrastructure is more expensive than infrastructure that's already built. Anyway, I could go on there too, but so our goal is to make sure that we have a system that's can be installed. 5 million people need a new roof every year, and over 1 million of those sites are excellent locations for solar. That's 10 gigawatts, and that's a good 10% of the new generation that we need. It's not all of it. Nothing's going to do all of it. We all hands on deck. We need the whole team on the field.
Okay, so to back up to how your technology is improving the home solar situation.
Yes.
So to clarify, the solar shingles you're talking about, it's a photovoltaic cell embedded into the roof shingle.
Yep. It's
so
actually,
So instead of placing panels on top of your existing shingled roof, you actually get shingles that are both the roof and have the solar panel embedded in them.
Yes. And where we're unique that there are solar shingle products out there. In fact, there are patents on solar shingle technology dating back to the 70s. But where we're unique is that our solar panels are actually attached mechanically to the back plate. And if you have a grapefruit-sized hail or a tree branch that flies and, hits your roof, the whole system isn't damaged. It's really just one or two. And they're class 4, which is essentially 40, 50-year shingles. You don't need to replace the whole roof. You can take out one shingle and replace it with another in 5 minutes, right? So everything else is actually, like you said, embedded within the shingle with epoxy, generally epoxy or other means. Tesla has a little different way of doing it, but Tesla, GAF, Certainty, they all have products that are epoxied or otherwise you need to remove the whole roof if you have roof damage. Ours, you can just remove the 1 or 2 damaged models and be back up and running. And, I say 5 minutes. The actual work is 5 minutes, but you still need to spend some time, figuring out which one is broken because the glass doesn't necessarily break. It might be that there might be a flex, which actually, puts a micro crack in a cell within that shingle. But yeah, that's where we stand out. We're not actually embedded. We're mechanically attached that can be quickly and easily be replaced by a roofer and electrician. 5 minutes once they find the problem.
Okay, and the roofing product can mostly be installed by roofers.
Absolutely. The connections are designed to be, they've frankly been on the marketplace for years. I don't know if you've ever plugged in a trailer with a 4-flat connection. That's basically what it is. So if a roofer can plug in a trailer, they can plug in the wires on the roof.
All right. So you've made it a lot easier to install, and so this is where you're talking about reducing the amount of labor and contractors and specialized knowledge that is required to actually install the product.
Yes. Yep. A crew of 4 or 5 roofers could do a house in a day or 2 if they're fully trained. Try getting a new roof, solar, and wired up to the grid done in 1 day. It's maybe possible in a lab.
Okay. And then you're talking about the durability of the product. Why is it so much more durable than a typical asphalt roof?
Well, it's almost bulletproof, not quite. I wouldn't shoot at solar, but it's they're really designed, and I can't think of there's hundreds of UL and ASTM standards that they need to meet to be able to put on people's houses. And the traditional solar really any solar now uses a 2 to, in some cases, 4 millimeter thick glass that's actually tested. In the lab, they'll drop ball bearings on them from 20 feet. And we've tested our resin up to class 4, which is a 2-inch ball bearing. 2 inches, you know what 2 inches is. It's pure steel. We actually had our kids climbing a ladder. We have pictures of it. Our kids are climbing a ladder, dropping ball bearings on plastic. But solar panels generally are rated to, I think, 1 or 1.5 inch ball bearings hitting in the same spot. So we use that same glass. Compare that to your traditional asphalt roofing or tile or something like that. They don't take that kind of punishment, right? So a solar panel now, a solar panel is above the roof, so no matter how strong that glass is, it's going to flex if it gets hit by something or stepped on by an unaware person or hit by a tree or whatever. It's going to crack, it's going to flex, whereas a solar shingle sitting, actually on the roof, you have to flex both the shingle and the underlying structural OSB and rafters to do that micro cracking. Generally, most roofs have a, 15, 20-year life, less if they, get pounded by hail, of course. But most people will just get the cheapest thing because they might not live in their house for 20 years. So, yeah. We're trying to make sure our product is as durable as possible, but also inexpensive. So, yeah.
Okay, and just consider this a naive question, but am I losing any electricity generation with this product that's sleeker and easier to install?
So the efficiency of a solar module is a function of how tightly you can pack the cells together. So when you have a 1 meter by 2 meter solar panel, you're going to have less frames than you would with a smaller solar panel like a shingle, right? So the technology's the same as far as, monocrystalline technology that the vast majority of solar is made from. So you lose some because there's more frames, but because solar shingles can go up, like valleys and hips, they can go up at a diagonal. Ours anyway, others can't. Teslas can, but if you want to spend $300,000 on a roof. But ours go up hips and valleys, so they can go in areas that, 1 meter by 2 meter blocky solar panels can't go. And unless you know what you're looking for, you won't even see them. So solar shingles can go places solar panels can't go. So the 1 or 2% of efficiency that's quote unquote lost by the frames is gained by the greater roof coverage they can do.
Okay. And you've sent us some photos of what the roof coverage looks like, and
Yep.
yeah, we'll put some of that in the video so people can see how different the solar shingles look compared to a typical solar panel.
Yep. And we're always going for more and better aesthetics too. So the solar shingles we've installed in the past, you can see that they're solar because you can see the bus bars on the front. But what we're doing with our new product is we're using round bus bars and actually doing some anodizing on them, as well as a fritted glass designed to look more like and blend in with the rest of the roofs. If you know what you're looking for, you'll still say, oh, those are Energy ReLeaf shingles. But if you don't know what you're looking for, you'll just be like, well, that's a damn fine roof.
And that's what a lot of people want, right? Like you said, they want their house to look the way it looked when they bought it, but they want the electricity generation to go with it. They want the energy independence.
Yeah, in some cases they might even need it, right? They've got, expensive tropical fish or medical needs or something like that. Like I said before, we're blessed to have a pretty good grid in the U.S. and in Minnesota. I have no complaints with our utility company doing what they're supposed to be doing, but in other parts of the country, they're not as good as our utility provider. So different markets are going to require different guts to that enclosure. Some batteries, some places, some straight grid tied, some might need, even more off-grid applications. And we have designs for all of those.
So if we can pause for a moment and just quick recap, because I've been making a list for myself just to try and keep things straight through the lens of an individual homeowner.
Yes.
Some of the barriers to adoption are aesthetics, price, interconnection complexity, installation time, and then there's of course the environmental cost. Considering that traditional solar is using traditionally on top of asphalt shingles. And with Energy ReLeaf, you're addressing the aesthetics, you're simplifying the installation, you're simplifying the ease of interconnection. They're modular, so you can replace, one set of solar shingles at a time. They're recyclable, they're more durable, and you're addressing the price. I mean, I'm assuming that this is more expensive than just replacing your roof, but I'm also assuming that you're addressing the price because they're also they have more longevity. Is that an accurate summation?
Yes. I mean, people are living in houses longer because housing costs are going up, right? So people that otherwise might move are staying in their house longer. So a roof that might need to be replaced twice in 40 years only needs to be replaced once, right? An average of 5 tons of asphalt per roof replacement that you're saving right there. That's, I don't know the exact numbers, but it's somewhere close to I suppose if you do look at 5 million houses, multiply that times, 3 to 5 million tons of asphalt going into the landfill every year. That's a lot of unrecyclable material, right? It's got nails in it. The best you can frankly do is pull out those nails and grind them up and put them in roads, right? Whereas with, solar panels are recyclable. Little trickier, but polypropylene and high density polyethylene are both just as recyclable as aluminum. It's just a matter of making sure that supply chain is a closed loop supply chain.
I think the goal was to clarify for the listener, as an individual potential consumer who, to use that phrase that Justin used earlier, like kind of just the lay fan of solar who might be considering it. Like what are the obstacles with traditional solar that they might be facing or that they don't know about yet if they were to start to go down the rabbit hole? And then what are some of the benefits, or alternatives that you're providing with Energy ReLeaf? I think that's just important to kind of crystallize for the listener so that they can kind of put apples next to apples, so to speak. But I think it's also important if we're going to take the time to also talk. We've had the privilege of hearing you talk about the different way that you think about energy providing energy. And we've obviously spent some time already talking about the utilities, at least here in the state of Minnesota. But you have kind of this different spin on how you're thinking about going about building this business and really how you're thinking about the energy transition in general. So I'm curious, Pete, if you could explain to people, the phrase that you've used with us is like you're trying to build a co-op.
Yes.
So could you explain to people what is a co-op and how is it different from the traditional business models that we're accustomed to interacting with our utilities or our energy consumption, right? Which is traditional utilities.
Well, if you live in a city, you either get your electricity through through either a municipal organization, which is, owned by the municipality, Austin, Minnesota has a municipal public utility. If you live in the Twin Cities area, you're largely served by Xcel Energy. That's an investor-owned utility. They have a fiduciary responsibility to their shareholders across the country, but Wall Street is primarily that. So they have a little different set of incentives than a municipality might. And then for rural areas, and these are all generalities, rural areas largely are cooperatives that have been around for many cases 100 years, right? As a comparison, for an investor-owned utility like Xcel Energy, which is a cooperative, Xcel Energy has gone through several different iterations. They haven't always been Xcel Energy. They started out as Northern States Power, getting electricity from turbines on St. Anthony Falls and downtown Minneapolis. And there's mergers, acquisitions. Now Xcel Energy covers 9 states and parts of 9 states and a couple. So they're big. They do well for their shareholders, but their shareholders aren't necessarily the little guy. And that's where cooperatives come in. Cooperatives, which serve most of the rural land area of this country, frankly, and in the 90s and 30s, companies like Northern States Power, the predecessor to Xcel, were serving the most profitable areas, which mean, they get paid by interconnection, right? They're interconnecting people. Xcel Energy got the population density areas in Minnesota, and people wanted electricity, and during the 90s, I can't recall the name of the act. I mean, there were cooperatives before the 1930s, but the 1930s kind codified some of the structure around cooperatives. So a electricity cooperative in the country is owned by its members. The fiduciary responsibility of a cooperative is to the people it serves, not outside investors. So that's the big difference, I would say. So
Yep.
My dad, 90 years old, still gets a check from Goodhue County Cooperative Electrical Association, GCCEA, right? They get their electricity from Great River Energy, which is a cooperative. It's a generation cooperative that is owned by its member cooperatives. I think there's about 30 of them. And generally, and a cooperative, there's 7 key principles. I'm not going to go through all of them, but probably the most important key principle is one member, one vote. So whether you own a 500 square foot tiny home or a 1 megawatt data center served by the utility, you can show up, make your, at the annual meeting, make your voice heard, talk to the board, vote for the board. No matter what your leverage, you have a voice, right? Try getting on the agenda for an Xcel Energy shareholder meeting, right? So, I think you can say something, but, so you technically have those rights as a shareholder of a cooperative, but they're not going to listen to you. Just to be crass about it.
Sure.
Yeah, they'll listen to you as a ratepayer. You actually have more leverage as a ratepayer because they can get fined if you complain loud enough. But for all the people listening.
Right. So again, this is one of those things where as a pretty naive consumer, I think, solar companies are all kind of the same, right? They're small, profit-motivated companies. So why did you choose to make Energy ReLeaf in this cooperative model, and how is it different than the other solar companies that might come knocking on my door?
Yep. So we're essentially a manufacturer, right? But we are owned by the installers. That's essentially our customer. And our installers' customers are the homeowners. So whereas a traditional manufacturer will build a bunch of stuff and then try to push it on the market, and it's really the installers that bear all the risk in that model. They, generally as a small, and the 100,000 or so roofing contractors nationwide are pretty small, pretty local. There's a couple big ones, no real national ones, because it's really very code and local knowledge dependent industry. Traditional manufacturers are corporations that build stuff. And once again, nothing wrong with corporations. I'm as big a fan of capitalism as anyone. But the incentives are to sell, push risk off on your customers, and try to avoid paying warranty claims and things like that. Whereas we, as a cooperative of our members, we can be fully transparent, and have to be, frankly, by law. We have to be fully transparent on what we're doing, what our costs are, what our financial position is. So a nationwide manufacturer, overnight, they'll go belly up, right? They'll go bankrupt. And all of a sudden, you might have 100,000 systems installed that now the customer doesn't know who to call, right? You have an orphaned system. And generally, they work pretty well, but just like anything with moving part, there's not very many moving parts, but there's a few moving parts, like in the inverter. Things are going to go bad. You're going to need to know who to call. As a cooperative, we don't have $1 billion to service warranty claims. So our way of warranting our product is making sure that every single one of the people that installs our product has gone through our training and is a member of the cooperative. So they actually have skin in the game. And it's not a lot of skin in the game, but everyone is going to get a share of those profits, not just the top shareholders.
Okay, so when you say everyone's getting a share of the profits, you're talking about the roofing contractors who are members of the co-op.
Correct. Yep. And we're a multi-stakeholder co-op. So the Class A shares, those are the roofers. We also have Class B, which are employees, and then there's the Class C, which is the shareholder class. So there are different incentives and I guess different entry points for each of those. But once again, it comes down to the principle of one member, one vote.
So talk to this again from the consumer end. So one thing I can think about is you said that the people who are installing on my roof are going to be more trained and more knowledgeable, and they're going to have a direct connection to the product and its maintenance.
Correct.
Yeah. And then those people, I can also maybe feel good about the fact that they have more skin in the game and they have more potential to profit, right? So the money I spend on my solar roof is not all going to some faceless corporation. A lot of that profit is actually going to the roofers who are doing the installation.
Yep, absolutely.
What else do I need to know as a consumer? Why is it better for me to necessarily work with a co-op like Energy ReLeaf as opposed to some other solar company?
Well, being a contractor is hard. And I was a residential building contractor, and we had a growing business, and then kids and COVID kind of happened at the same time. And I still have roofs out there, solar shingle roofs and solar installs that because I like to think I'm a good person. If they have a problem, they'll call me up and I'll still help them. But I'm not obligated to help them. My company that install that no longer exists, right? As a cooperative, the customer can rest assured that knowing even if the person that installed their system goes out of business, retires, sells their business to a corporation that has no obligation, they still have a relationship with the cooperative and other identically trained contractors who also have the same skills and philosophy, frankly, of a restorative energy system rather than exploitative.
So we started this interview talking about the necessity of making a larger transition to renewable energy, right? To build out capacity. Are co-ops going to be better suited to make a large scale transition than some of the other business models?
Yes, because of that fact that they are the most economically resilient business model out there. I'll just throw out a couple of the cooperatives that you may or may not know are cooperatives. Land O'Lakes, big food company. Senex Harvest States, or CHS, massive food logistics and supply chain, company owned by farmers and producers, right? In Spain, there's a manufacturing cooperative, Mondragon. It looks like Mondragon, but I think it's pronounced Mondragon. They are like a $12 billion company owned by small manufacturers in a valley. I think it's in the Basque region or something like that. Started during the Spanish Revolution and Franco days because they were getting preyed upon by authoritarians and dictators. So in times of crisis, small producers, small manufacturers come together and they pool their capital, what little of it is, and they can make something of it. It's one of the only ways, frankly, that people in a democratic society have of fighting back against robber barons like they did in the late 1800s and early 1900s with cooperatives, right? And cooperatives. And I'm very proud to state that it's super important. I mean, we don't need the French Revolution. We need more cooperatives.
Yeah, and so this definitely is coming off as a little bit personal for you. So
yeah.
Would you mind telling us a little bit more about your background? I know you grew up on a farm. Talk to us a little bit about how your personal background has led to you, getting involved in the energy transition game, and how your personal background plays into this co-op philosophy.
Yeah, I always knew my parents were a little different growing up, but it's not until you actually grow up and have kids and look back on life where you start understanding where your trajectory came from. My dad, his dad was kind of a conventional farmer, 200-acre dairy farm in near Red Wing, Minnesota, about an hour from Minneapolis. But yeah, his dad did conventional, herbicides, pesticides, all that. And once my dad got the farm from his dad, he basically went cold turkey, stopped with the herbicides and the pesticides. And it was really hard work. I mean, we were out there in fields pulling weeds by hand sometimes, right? And we're like, Dad, why don't you just spray like your neighbors? And he's like, it's not the right thing for the land. So we kind of had that foundation of hard work and doing the right thing, no matter how inconvenient it might be, as our foundation. My mom was frugal, let's just say, and both my parents remodeled our house, putting a south-facing sun porch in because, and my mom's quoted in an article from, I think, the Red Wing Republican Eagle saying there was so much sun going to waste out there. So in January, we would nap in, no heat on in the whole house, 0 degrees, January sun, which means it's colder than if it were cloudy. So
Right.
the sun would be out, we'd come home after church, and just nap all afternoon in this 90-degree sun porch in the middle of January I think that we had a wood burning stove going on in the south end of the house, but we didn't realize how weird that was, I guess, until we grow up and we talk about that. And just, the driver was my dad. My dad wanted to do the right thing no matter what, and my mom was cheap. But the ultimate result was, I think we can do better than just burning stuff for our electricity. My mom was a teacher. My dad was a farmer. I knew when I was 3 I did not want to be a farmer. It's too hard work. So I was a teacher for about 10 years in urban Milwaukee. I've always had a passion for training and teaching people, as well as empowering local communities to make choices. Energy sovereignty is a word that I'm using more and more and more. There's a push within indigenous communities now for energy sovereignty. They never have been able to, frankly, depend on the white man, right? So I get a lot of white person jokes when I'm around, but it's fun, right? So, we had energy sovereignty for the most part growing up. I mean, we needed electricity, but we were cheap. So my mom didn't want to spend the money on propane, filling up her propane tank all the time. So a combination of doing the right thing for the land, doing the right thing for people. And like I tell people too, poverty is not sustainable either, right? Losing money is not sustainable. You still need to make money. So it's the interlocking rings of people, planet, and profit is really, I could be working at Xcel Energy, counting the days down until I can earn my pension, or I can work until I die, I guess. But every day I enjoy what I'm doing, and, working at the utility is not bad, but at a certain point it wasn't for me because it started to misalign with who I am as a person.
And Energy ReLeaf does align with who you are as a person.
Yep. And a number one question of investors, of course, is what's your exit strategy? And I'm like 6 feet below, man. That's, I mean, I know we can make money for people, but that's not our first priority, right? So we will make money. We are making revenue right now. We're doing some jobs with solar shingles, not our own product. Our own product has a little ways to go to the marketplace. We have our designs. We have our patents that are going through examinations right now. I'm doing consulting. So, losing money, number one of being a startup is survive. We're doing what it takes to survive ethically and honorably, we hope. Well, we know. That's why we have a board that keeps us in check, right? We make sure, and our board is made up of owners, right? So combination of investor owners and installer owners that have all signed on to our cooperative principles and our sustainability. My number one favorite authors is Gregory Unruh, Unruh. I took a class when I was getting my MBA from him I was a Costa Rica seminar, and he has a couple books. There's the Biosphere Rules is, I think, one of his latest books, but really talks about how the economy of business should really think about the 5 principles that he lays out. Like we use a parsimonious palette, like Earth uses, carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, a very small handful. It's those basic building blocks of life. You begin with the end in mind. It aligns also with Stephen Covey, right? You design for end of use, a circular economy. Yeah.
So we like to finish with an opportunity for our guests to speak directly to our audience with a couple of questions. So what is the highest leverage system level change that would help move the energy transition you're thinking about forward?
System level, I want people to ask their roofers about solar. That's like system wide, just getting the 100,000 roofers in the country to say, hey, you have a sunny roof. Would you like shingles that pay you back? Right? Doesn't add a penny to the customer acquisition cost for roofers. That's what I'd like to see. So system wide, getting that awareness to people that your roofers can also help you with your energy bills.
Okay. And then maybe after that answer, this question's a little redundant, but what is one individual level thing average consumer or citizen can do?
Ask your roofer about solar.
Right.
And we are crowdfunding now, and the regulation CF, which we're raising under through WeFunder, the minimum to become an investor is $100, and it's not a donation. It's actual. There's revenue sharing behind that, and for the first $100,000 of investment, it's 2.75x returns. Your $100 becomes $275, through revenue sharing, right? And then you have full participation in future priced rounds. So I can send the link to you, Justin, for the WeFunder. These are the people we're going after. Sure, these people it'd be great if those people gave us money, but there will be a cost. I mean, there's a cost with everything. We would just rather distribute that cost to real people.
Well,
rather than supermassive black holes of capital.
All right. Well, we will share that with the real people who listen to our pod.
Yeah, and if you have more than $100, you can get 10% off on a solar roof if you have $1,000. That pays for itself right there. So yeah,
that's beautiful. All
yep.
right.
And if you have a lot of money, we'll take that too. But
right.
we're really focused on the little guy.
Well, hopefully people with money are listening to your vision for the co-op and
I hope so too.
And the solar energy transition.
I like people with money. I have an MBA. I mean, I'm not biting the hand that feeds me, but there's a lot of hands out there too.
Yeah. All right. Pete Reese, thanks for being on the Turning Point today.
Thank you, Ian and Justin. I appreciate your time and what you guys are doing. It's great.
Yeah, thanks for the work that you do, Pete.
Thank you. Have a great rest of your week.
Big thanks to Pete for being our guest today, and big thanks to you for listening. To learn more about Energy ReLeaf, go to their website at energyreleaf.com. That's RELEAF, spelled like leaf on a tree. If you're interested in investing in what they do, check out the link below for their crowdfunding campaign. And finally, if you're an impact-driven founder who needs help scaling your mission, look no further and check us out at stillpointinsight.com.